Welcome to the very first episode of the Cadre's podcast. Today we have a very renowned guest joining us. From the Student Union, we have Shreesh Agarwal, the Vice President of External Affairs. This man needs no introduction. He's been to multiple conferences representing the Student Union's needs and been advocating for students throughout the year. He's been to conferences like CASA. He's hosted the Bridging Voices, a student politician dialogue. He has even represented the student needs to Premier Dennis King. So Shreesh, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, and thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Great, it's a pleasure to have you for our very first episode. A very influential personality you are. So to begin with, I want to ask that you've been a VP External for about almost a year now, and throughout your journey, you've attended multiple conferences, seminars, like the CASA itself, and you've obviously improved your lobbying skills and your confidence, your determination. So how has the journey been for you so far in terms of your own personal growth?
It's been a very rewarding journey, and before I talk about my own personal growth, I'd like to talk about the students. Through this position, I've had a chance to meet hundreds and hundreds of UPEI students, whether it be at events that I hosted, events that I attended, or just tabling in the concourse. I've heard so many different stories, and for example, with the CASA's, the Canadian Alliance of Student Associations, and with their Canada Students Grant Campaign, I was just in the concourse, just meeting students and having them sign checks, and like really hearing about their stories and their struggles with affordability, and just the amount of students that I heard from, it made me feel slightly happy in a weird way that I had a chance to represent them and advocate for their needs to all levels of government. A few things that I'm really proud of are, for example, at CASA's Advocacy Week conference, I had a chance to meet with the Deputy Prime Minister's office. Sadly, Christopher Freeland herself at the time was not available, but I had a chance to meet with her staff and not only gain some valuable connections, but also really hear insights from the department. And the unique thing there is that you get a lot more out of the staff than you would out of the elected official, simply because the staff just tell you what they're looking for in order for these changes or similar changes to happen. Another thing that I'm really proud of would be the Bridging Voices event. It was really the culmination of all of my and the union's engagement throughout the year, with not just on campus but off campus as well. To have so many elected officials there, to have 2 cabinet ministers, a senator, and just so many politicians, but also so many students there. It was really satisfying to see that. Personally, I feel like I've gotten a lot more confident, a lot more well-spoken, and I'm just more comfortable just starting random new conversations with people. That being said, if you see me at a social event where I know no one, I'm still going to be awkward. It's like, what is happening? Why am I here? But that's just the way things work. But overall, I've seen not just myself, and I've seen this entire team grow together. Every now and then, particularly with George, like last year when I met him in March when he was campaigning, like February, I was like, who is this man? And it was like really difficult to even imagine, us becoming close friends, because just my social circle is very different. And then I've seen him grow so much, and the two people, he's the same person between 2 years, is completely different personalities, at least to me. And like we've gotten a lot closer throughout the year, and I'm just happy to have had this team.
That's great. It's definitely been a roller coaster experience for you, but just hearing you talk itself is understandable that you've grown so much, you've learned so much, you've made new connections, and that's really good. We'll now dive into more student focused questions. To begin with, so recently the government has been kind of pressing students. They've changed the work rule from 20 hours a week to 24 hours a week. Similarly, with the reduction of PAL and the $3,000 tuition deposit, these stuffs have affected international students a lot. And has the SU planned on anything regarding this? You wrote the student advocacy document where you talked in depth about things that have been going on and things you've recommended things to the government. Would you like to shed some light upon that?
Of course, so there's 2 recommendations in particular that we're focused on. So if you look at our advocacy document, Reimagine Affordable, Accessible, and Sustainable Post-Secondary Education, PEI, you'll notice that the last 2 recommendations follow exactly what you're talking about. So recommendation 5 is about the International Student Employment Support Program, and some of you, on the podcast, you might have heard about this program before because it already exists. So it's been on campus for 4 years now, and they're 2-year agreements, and now it has since expired. So these agreements essentially provide wage subsidies for 30 international students, and we connect them with the market. So 5 and 6 we work in tandem because recommendation 5 with ISCSP, that's typically targeted towards first and second year students, and recommendation 6 is a new part-time internship program, and I'll get into that just in a second, which is targeting graduating students. So ultimately, in a place like PEI, we know that in many cases, who you know might end up helping you more than what you know. Meaning like the connection you have are more impactful sometimes than the coursework that you've done. So using that ICSP is really good to build those connections and roots early on. For example, George, I was talking about him earlier. He, as a history major, recognizes that to find jobs in your field is really difficult, particularly on a small island like PEI.
Yeah.
In his first summer here as an international student, he was able to find a job at Beaconsfield House, working in heritage and really in industry and building connections. And it's always a funny story to me. Like, we had a meeting with the Mayor Brown, and after the meeting, we're just walking towards the bus stop to come back to campus, and he just bumps into this lady, and they have a full conversation for like 10 minutes. And I asked later, I asked him who that was, and that was someone he met at Beaconsfield House. So it's just the longevity of these connections. Like, that was like 3 or 4 years after your work there, right?
Yeah.
So the longevity of these connections that you make in PEI, they're really incredible. So we're working. I've asked the government for an annual investment of $215,000 to continue paying for this program and continue getting the international students acclimated to the PEI work environment.
That's great.
At the same time, we have the part-time internship program that's targeted towards 20 graduating students, where essentially their last semester, typically January to April, they work with an employer essentially as an extended onboarding period. And once they graduate, they go directly into the workforce by working full-time for that same employer. So the moment they graduate, they have a full-time job offer. So it's a low dollar value cost essentially for the government, because it's only $60,000 per year. But the impact of it is 20 students directly into the workforce in their field is going to be a lot more significant. So these two, we've been using them in tandem, and we have been receiving a lot of traction from the government. So I'm just optimistic that the budget cycle has some good news for us.
That's great. That's great. A quick question about the transformation from students from working part-time to full-time after graduation. You said that 20 students are selected for this. On what basis are they selected?
So that's actually a really good point, because we're not really inviting students to apply into the program. We're actually inviting employers, and when I say we, I mean the Department of Experiential Education.
Okay.
We're just really just advocating on their behalf in collaboration with them, because they will run the program. So that's what I mean by we. So
Okay.
we're inviting employers to the program because really, what do these employers want? They don't really care about first or second year students. They care about fresh talent about to graduate with all the knowledge and experiences of having gone to university, which is why we're inviting employers to come and apply and explain to us, why do you deserve our top students? And then once we have these, similar to how they've had their ICSP, because for the 30 seats that I mentioned that you have in ICSP, they've received over 200 applications for the past 2 to 3 years, which is a lot of applications. So just the same qualifications and really matching them, but this time be specific to the industries and the employers that have expressed interest. So if we have, I don't know, if the Cadre is hiring, then we won't really give them a computer science student. We'll give them someone. Sorry, no offense to you.
Okay.
Forgot about that. So if the Cadre is hiring, we're not really going to give them a computer science student. We're maybe going to try finding a journalism student or someone who really fits the criteria of the company, because the companies have established themselves with us, like, who do they want and why are they capable of taking our students. So we've flipped it, and to answer your question, that's actually not even what we're doing. We're inviting the employers.
Right, that's great. Talking about the ICP, it has been a really good alternative for students who have missed out on co-ops. A lot of my friends have been trying to get into co-ops, and because of the limited seats, not everyone is able to make through. The ICP has been a really good boon for the students who've been trying to stay in the summer, get some more work experience, and kudos, you guys have done a really good job. The applications, I think, are open already for this summer, so I myself am planning to apply. That's good. Moving on forward to the next question. So there have been considerable tuition fee increases, and you've attended conferences in Nova Scotia, Halifax, about the tuition fee hike. Would you like to shed some more light upon the subject?
Of course. So, like, This year we have no idea what that's going to be, and that's because tuition, like every year, is determined when the budget is passed, and typically the first week of April at the Board of Governors. The student union, like over the past few years, we've established ourselves like we will always vote against the budget if it has a tuition hike that we deem unfair. So last year was 5%, which we deemed unfair, so we voted against it. Again, I was on the Board of Governors with the then President Camille Madi. Now let's. In the past, we've asked for tuition regulation, and that is something I campaigned about as well. But it hasn't worked, and let's look at it. Let's look at why it hasn't worked. At the end of the University Act, says the UPEI has the right to set, determine, and collect fees, like tuition and fees, which is completely fair. So even when speaking with the government, they're like, well, you should not be talking to us about tuition regulation. Go to the province. Yeah. Even though, for example, in provinces like BC, where they have the exact same thing in the University Acts, they've had it. They've had tuition regulation of 2% since I was born. Now let's look at how the budget process works at UPEI. They passed the budget in April with the tuition fees. After they receive the operating grant from the province in February. So they have about 6 weeks to really quickly turn around, see how much money they will receive from the province. Typically it's along the same lines, but you still can't make decisions until you've seen the final operating budget or the grant. So they take that money and then they come up with their own internal budget, which determines the fees. So if they receive less money from the province or they have increasing expenses internally, that the remaining portion gets passed on to students. So really the university has no way to actually regulate tuition fees without understanding how much money they're going to get from the province. So that's why we're looking at a memorandum of understanding. So we built this off of what happened in Nova Scotia over the past few years, and the most recent memorandum of understanding (MOU) was from 2019 to 2024. But because of the changing dynamics and the differences between the institutions, they have since moved to like annual bilateral agreements, similar to what we have currently in PEI. But an MOU is a lot more than tuition regulation. In like a 4 or 5 page document, it's just one sentence. Everything else is how do you recruit students, or your workplace cultures. And with the Reuben Thompson report, the action plan, which the province is also very interested in, a lot of those implications can be included in the MOU to create explicit roles and responsibilities on the university's behalf of how are they going to live up to this MOU. So we've really approached this MOU, and typically we've seen resistance from the province because like, well, you should speak to the university about tuition regulation, which is why I'm very happy that George and I had a chance to present to the Standing Committee on Education and Economic Growth last week, where we really went as deep as possible into the MOU and explaining to them this is a lot more than just tuition regulation. There are so many elements of this where both the province can put in their expectations from the university and the university can get a long-term funding contract, because if it's a 4 or 5 year document, it also outlines how much money the province is going to give them. And if the university knows how much money they're getting from the province, they can also better predict tuition fees for students, even if it's whether or not it's regulated, right? So this MOU, if drafted properly, will benefit all three parties, with the parties being the government, the university, and the students. And ultimately, the university is on board to start conversations. We've talked to Dr. Rogers, we've talked to the senior admin, and they would like to see a multi-year contract like this. So it's really just getting the province on board to start the conversation, because once the conversation starts, it's still going to take at least 1 or 2 years before we even have the draft of it ready, right? Yeah. To kind of just see what both parties want out of it. And ultimately, once the two parties are discussing, the student union is not a part of it, because that's an MOU between the university and the province. Yeah. Our only ask is that if such an MOU is drafted, regulate tuition and give our students some long-term sustainability and predictability to just be, for them to be able to just manage their finances better.
That's good. Let's hope that an understanding is really these criteria are met. Hopefully, it will be great for students coming forward to UPEI over the next few years. Moving forward to the next question. You, in the month of December, you had met Premier Dennis King and you had presented your advocacy document with around 6 recommendations for the government to ease the situation for students here at UPEI. How was the experience altogether meeting Premier Dennis King, and how did they respond to your suggestions?
The meeting actually went very well. He was a very warm, welcoming person to talk to, and that meeting was also not just with the Premier King. It was with Minister Redmond, the Minister of Workforce, Advancing and Population, and Adam Ross, the Principal Secretary to the Premier. So with these three very knowledgeable people in the room, it was a very well-informed meeting, and I was really happy with the meeting because we also got a lot of clarity. for example, some of our recommendations that were kind of getting shut down or not getting really received well, instead of just me getting like a no or like getting redirected, we really heard from the province, well, we heard from the premier exactly why he thinks these recommendations are not fit or they're not a good suggestion to the province at the moment, right? Or like why the province can't work on that. So we also really got a lot of clarity, which will help us build those future advocacy efforts, and it also helps us build relationships with the staff. And in terms of the overall experience, I think, like earlier I mentioned, I had a meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister's office, and even like the picture we took in that room, there's 7 Canadian flags behind us, and like I've never seen that many flags together in my life, right? Well, that many flags of one country. So the fact that the meeting with the premier was the week after the meeting, like the week after we were at CASA for Advocacy Week, that really helped me a lot, because at Advocacy Week I had like 5 or 6 lobby meetings where I met with MPs, like Liberal MPs, Conservative MPs, NDP MPs. I met with the Deputy Prime Minister's office. So you just meet with so many different people during Advocacy Week that the week after I was like, well, yeah, that's fine, I can do that. But anyways, it was a very like chill meeting. Like it was still very professional and formal, but he was just very warm and welcoming, which made it a lot easier just to have a conversation and like go back and forth and trying to see what we can work on. We did receive some positive feedback on some of our recommendations, but ultimately, like we even heard this explicitly from the Minister of Finance, that there's a thing called the trust in the cabinet. So they can't really give us any indications of like they can essentially all they can do is tell us, oh, I like that, but that's it. They can't give us any indication of what they're planning to do, because they have to wait until the budget is released, because otherwise it violates the trust in the cabinet, and the government basically is leaking information at that point. So that's completely understandable, and we don't expect them to violate that trust for us. But we've received some positive feedback on a couple of our recommendations, so I'm optimistic with this budget cycle just to see what results in services for students.
That's great. You hosted the Student Politician Dialogue, the Bridging Voices event in January. It was a huge success, by the way. Pretty sure, I mean, it's been covered everywhere by CBC News, by the Cadre itself. Me and Sayed were there. It was an amazing event. My question to you is, you had invited so many government officials under one roof for a short amount of time, but that itself is a huge achievement in itself, because we don't see these events at UPEI. I think over the past 3 years, in my 3 years here, this is the first time I've seen such an open event, such a vocal event, and the chance for students to meet politicians, bring forth their concerns. It was very successful. So how did you manage to do that? Like, find a particular slot for government officials? Like, it must have been a huge, difficult task. How did you execute it so perfectly?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your kind words, and I'm glad you liked the event. It honestly wasn't as difficult as I thought, but that's again speaking in hindsight. So in terms of finding the particular date, it's really, you just go online, you see, and it's harder with the municipality and the city of Charlottetown, but with the provincial government and the federal government, they have their own schedules. So you look at when they're sitting, when the committees are meeting, and you try to find a sweet spot. For me, that sweet spot was January 16th, and it might look very different in the coming years. But for example, like the province legislature doesn't sit until the end of February, and the parliament got prorogued, but they were supposed to sit at the end of January. So Jan 16th was really a good timing, and particularly, I really like the start of the winter semester, because we've had a chance over the past 8 months as the executive team to meet with a number of politicians and develop relationships with these officials. At the same time, January is like coming into the peak budgeting season, because the budget, when it's announced in February or March, a lot of the work is like getting wrapped up or like really in its peak stages or critical stages in January. So for all these elected officials to have a chance to speak to so many of our students and hear their perspectives, it definitely goes a long way to ensuring that some of our advocacy efforts, they translate. And I guess to go back, and I think I shared this with the cadre as well, a reason I really wanted that event to happen is because we have a really good working relationship with the government. We've met with so many people, and we have a relatively good relationship with students, I'd like to imagine. But we find that despite us bringing the students' concerns as representatives to the government, sometimes we're missing the student voices behind us. Like, we're missing the actual engagement or the actual like, oh my god, I'm struggling, I need this help. We're missing all those anecdotal stories that push our recommendations over the line. So an event like this, politicians, they already know our recommendations. I gave a few of them my lobby docs, particularly the ones that we haven't met very frequently, but they weren't all over the event because they all know what we're asking for. They all know what we're here for, and I just wanted them to resonate some of our recommendations with students directly, because at the end of the day, whether or not they think about this actively in the legislature, it will subconsciously help them make their decisions and really understand the student perspective. So ultimately, it just comes down to developing a good relationships with the politicians. And I'm not gonna lie, I was more afraid about students not showing up than I was about the politicians because they were RSVPing, right?
Yeah.
And we emailed them like all the way back in like November for the event, and just letting them know this is happening, so save the date and please come. So we heard back from quite a few politicians. We had a few last minute RSVPs, last minute cancellations, the typical that happens. It's also about maintaining a transparent relationship, particularly with the staff. Some of it, like I'd also invited a bunch of provincial staff, and like none of them showed up, but that's because they're elected representatives that were there instead. But when the staff came back to us with questions like, what is the purpose? Is it going to be a panel, or is there going to be people yelling at them? It's like, no, it's going to be just an informal networking event. We have a poster campaign leading up to the event, so you might see the posters around, but that's really not the focus of the event. It's just a chance to come, sit down, stand up and talk to your students. So overall, I think it was just a very informal event, and that helped to get some more politicians, because if it's a panel, then there's a lot more preparation to go into and kind of give them a heads up on the questions and whether they're appropriate or not. So I think the style of the event worked out pretty well, and I hope it continues on into the future years.
That's great. Yeah. Definitely a good start. Like for VP External, last year I didn't think there was any sort of event like this, and the way you executed it was pure perfection. Everything was formal, 100%. It was smooth, as if we were talking to politicians and we knew them for years. There was a very good sense of understanding between the students and the politicians. Moving on to the next question. So, are you planning on coming back for VP External?
Sadly not. It's been a difficult decision. I've been going back and forth quite a bit. Like, do I run? Do I not run? But I graduate in December, so it will also be a decision to like extend my degree. That being said, I'm in the cooperative education program, which I mentioned earlier, and I'd love to get an experience outside the union. Like I really enjoyed working in policy and working in advocacy, but it's also recognizing that being an executive is a lot more than just your portfolio. There's at the end, it's funny, at the end of every executive and their job description says other duties as required. That's half my job. And like I've sat here and I've talked about my advocacy work so much, but the amount of outside things, like my most random day, and I was actually telling a student about this yesterday, is that early in the morning, so I was in a full suit. I had a meeting with an MLA or lunch or something, and then after that we went to the bank. We went to Dollarama to do Christmas shopping while I'm in my suit, and then I came back to take an online meeting with the Canadian Lancet Student Association, which is more advocacy work, and then I changed and we started cleaning the office. So it was a very random day, and that's honestly what my everyday looks like. There's just so many different random things going on. So like I'd love to do this, but I think being a full-time student and being a full-time executive, if you commit all like 100% to both, it's very taxing, and I am happy to pass the baton on to someone else.
I understand. Well, we love having you, and myself included. Pretty sure all the students would love to see you come back for round 2. But your discussion makes more sense. The question is there any particular thing that you wish to achieve, a goal that you had set in mind during your tenure, which hasn't been able to met yet, and you want, and how do you want to see it develop?
So far, I think updating the external policy book. So we use our advocacy efforts and our lobby documents to develop a really long policy book. So during the summer, I did do a lot of formatting changes, a few content changes here and there as well, but it's still out of date. Like a lot of the policies are expired or in the wrong section. So I hope to be working on that for the remainder of the semester. But there's also a lot more like follow-up items with the province or just other proposals that we need to submit. So I want to prioritize that. So if I can't do it right now, I'll just prep the next VP External of really what areas in particular to look at. So hopefully they can do it over the summer, because a lot of the back-end work was done last summer already. The other thing is continuity, and I know that's and it's not really that I haven't been able to accomplish it. It's just recognizing that continuity takes more than just 1 year of a VP External. So one thing I've reintroduced is Highrise. It's a customer relationship management software where you just I upload all our meeting minutes and more of the unsaid things that we notice with politicians, or just other important people of how to maintain relationships with these stakeholders, what to talk about, what not to talk about. So hopefully in the coming years we continue to use the software and just have the continuity with the government, particularly with their recommendations. Sometimes we'll talk about 4 or 5 things, and then regardless of whether or not we get them, the next team, and really not really blaming anyone, they see different priorities, so we talk about 4 completely different things, and that results in a lot of stale conversations or stale advocacy efforts, because from the province's side, or whoever's on the other side of the table, they see, these first 1 or 2 meetings, we're just meeting them for the first time. That's a couple months gone. Then they develop the policies they bring, and it's really just waiting until the next team, because by the time you get to February, you can't really bring anything new up, right? That it's we're working on this, blah blah blah, and then we just have to waste enough time until it's a new team again. And unless we have the continuity and advocacy, where we're really focusing on similar topics, and if the solutions haven't worked, then propose just a different version of the same solution. So for example, instead of asking for tuition regulation outright, ask for an MOU, and if that doesn't work, or if that works but needs to get for just a few more pushes, then keep working on that. I think those continuity elements could go a long way in bringing supports for our students.
That's great. That makes total sense. I mean, you highlighted that there should be a transition to the next VP external. The goals that you've set, they should be continued in order to maintain the same kind of structure and format, and basically the next VP external could add to it rather than totally changing stuff. So I'm not sure if you're listening to this, the next VP external, this is some solid advice from the big man here. Keep that in mind. Moving forward to the last question, Shreesh, are you aware of the nominations for the VP external this semester, and do you have any advice for them? Any particular favorites, anything like that?
Work with the staff, and staff goes everywhere. So not just the staff at the SU or staff at the university, but the staff of the province. You'll meet with a lot of elected officials, and you'll meet with so many different people. But unless you break through to the staff, which honestly even I haven't fully done, unless you break through to the provincial and the federal staff, it becomes really difficult to get anything done, because they're the ones moving all the wheels. You can get commitments or something out of politicians, but unless you have some of the staff giving the information, the data, or just working with them to say, what else do you need, or how can we move this forward, without the relationship with the staff, it's very difficult to do anything. And that applies to everything, even at the union. Some of my best friends and my closest colleagues here are my staff. Not my staff, but the staff that work at the union, and just having a good working relationship with them has gone a long way. And I think just to echo the continuity thing again, as long as we make sure we keep having consistent conversations with the government, and feel free to add your own personality to it, or to add your own flair to it, but in terms of just focus on a few recommendations that are more likely to be achieved, and just keep them going on, whether you modify them slightly or use different data to support them. But I think that would go a long way in getting your students the supports and services that they need.
Great. So that brings up to the wrap of our very first podcast. We are extremely pleased and privileged to have Shreesh here for our very first episode. He's done an amazing job throughout the year. We can't wait to see what he achieves in the future. Shreesh, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I like the opportunity, and good luck to everyone running in the elections.
Great. Thank you.